I never thought today would be the day my entire life would shift on its axis. Standing in the office's dingy break room, where only a flickering fluorescent tube cast dancing shadows and the air reeked of stale coffee that had been sitting since morning, I was desperately trying to hide my bruised wrist beneath my sleeve. The pain itself was sharp, shooting up my forearm whenever I moved. But what hurt more than the physical injury was the humiliation that came with it. Yesterday evening, Marcus, the senior marketing lead with his perfectly pressed suits and condescending smirk, had practically shoved me while I was carrying a stack of files. I'd fallen hard, papers scattering everywhere like autumn leaves, and he'd laughed. Actually laughed. The worst part, everyone else had seen it happen and simply looked away, continuing their conversations as if I didn't exist. Because that's all I was to them. Casper, the 22-year-old intern who nobody took seriously, the invisible boy who fetched coffee and made copies. My anxiety was already climbing when suddenly the break room door swung open and an eerie silence fell over the space like a heavy blanket. I was frantically pulling my sleeve down, trying to cover the evidence of yesterday's incident, but my movements froze completely when I noticed that every single person in the room had turned their attention toward the doorway. Their expressions ranged from shock to barely concealed fear. That's when I saw him, Silas Kane, the company's CEO. He was tall, probably 6'3", with a sharp jawline that could cut glass and dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to see through every lie you'd ever told. He never came down to this floor. Never. The executive level was a different world entirely, one that people like me only glimpsed through elevator rides and company-wide emails. Yet here he was, walking with measured, purposeful steps directly toward where I stood frozen near the coffee machine. Casper. He said my name and my brain short-circuited. How did he even know who I was? I was nobody, just another faceless intern in a sea of ambitious young professionals. He stopped right in front of me, and his presence was so commanding that the entire room seemed to shrink around us. The other interns and junior employees were staring openly now, not even pretending to look busy. I scrambled to stand up straighter, moving so quickly that my chair toppled backward with a loud crash that echoed through the now silent room. Awkward. Always so painfully awkward. But Silas didn't even glance at the fallen chair. His intense gaze was locked onto my left hand, which I was clutching protectively against my chest as if I were hiding stolen goods. "Show me your hand." His voice was low and measured, carrying the calm authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. This wasn't a request, it was a command. And something in his tone told me that refusing wasn't an option. My throat went dry as sandpaper. I couldn't find the courage to argue with him or make up an excuse. So slowly, reluctantly, I extended my left hand forward. My sleeve was still partially covering my wrist, but before I could say anything, Silas leaned forward slightly and pushed the fabric up in one swift, efficient motion. The purple bruise was now fully visible, ugly and dark against my pale skin, with distinct finger-shaped marks that told their own story of someone grabbing me with unnecessary force. The silence in the room became suffocating, as if everyone had collectively stopped breathing. I watched as Silas's jaw tightened, the muscle there pulsing visibly. His features transformed from professionally neutral to stone-cold fury in the span of a heartbeat. "Who did this?" His tone was dangerously quiet now, the kind of voice that promised consequences, the kind that made your survival instincts scream at you to tell the truth. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat had closed up completely, and I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes from sheer overwhelm. Then Silas did something that shocked me even more. He took my injured wrist in both of his hands, cradling it with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his intimidating presence. His touch was reverent, almost tender, as if I were made of fragile porcelain that might shatter. He looked up from my wrist and locked eyes with me, and the intensity in his gaze made my knees weak. "I asked you a question, Casper. Who touched you?" In that moment, all my carefully constructed walls began crumbling. Because nobody, not a single person in my entire life, had ever looked at me like this, with such genuine concern and protective anger. Nobody had ever cared enough to ask if I was okay. The weight of years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as disposable crashed over me all at once. I could feel everyone else in the break room watching this scene unfold, probably recording it on their phones, already composing the gossip messages they'd send the moment we left. But right then, looking into Silas's dark eyes that held nothing but focused attention on me, the rest of the world faded into background noise. My voice came out as barely a whisper, cracked and broken. "It doesn't matter, I'm fine, it was just an accident. Don't lie to me." Silas's thumb moved in slow, careful circles around the edge of the bruise, never touching the injury itself, but somehow providing comfort through proximity. "Accidents don't leave marks like this. Someone grabbed you hard enough to hurt you, and I need to know who." His voice softened slightly, but the steel underneath remained. "Please, Casper, tell me." I felt something break inside my chest, that last bit of resistance that had been keeping me upright and functional. Because the way he said please, like my answer actually mattered, like I actually mattered, was more than I could handle. Tears spilled over before I could stop them, hot and shameful on my cheeks. In front of the CEO. In front of everyone. Perfect. Just perfect. But Silas didn't look disgusted or uncomfortable like most people did when confronted with emotions. Instead, he released my wrist carefully and pulled a pristine handkerchief from his pocket, pressing it into my other hand. "Take your time," he said quietly, and there was something in his expression, vulnerability maybe, or understanding, that made me believe he genuinely meant it. That he would stand here in this dingy break room with its flickering lights and stale coffee smell, waiting for as long as it took for me to find my voice and tell him the truth about what had happened to me. Sleep had been impossible. I'd spent the entire night lying in my cramped studio apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling, while Silas's words played on an endless loop in my mind. "Who touched you?" The concern in his voice, the gentle way he'd held my injured wrist, that penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight through every defense I'd built around myself over the years. Part of me wanted desperately to tell him everything. How Marcus had been making my life miserable for months. How the casual cruelty had escalated from snide comments to deliberately sabotaging my work to finally physical aggression. But another part of me, the part that had learned to survive by staying small and invisible, whispered that speaking up would only make things worse. Marcus was powerful in this company, well-connected and charming to the people who mattered. Who would believe a nobody intern over him? When I finally dragged myself into the office the next morning after maybe 2 hours of fitful sleep, the atmosphere felt charged with electric tension. People who normally wouldn't spare me a glance were now openly staring, whispering behind their hands as I walked past. Some looked curious, others seemed judgmental, and a few actually appeared sympathetic. I kept my head down and made my way to my tiny desk in the corner of the open floor plan, settling into my chair and opening my laptop with shaking hands. My goal was simple: blend in, disappear into my work, pretend yesterday hadn't happened. But of course, nothing in my life ever went according to plan. Marcus was holding court near the water cooler with his usual entourage of sycophants and social climbers. I could feel his eyes on me even before I looked up, that predatory awareness that made my skin crawl. When our eyes met across the office, he smiled, not friendly, but calculating, like a cat that had cornered a mouse and was deciding how long to play before delivering the killing blow. His friends noticed me too, and their laughter carried across the floor, artificial and cruel. They were definitely talking about me, probably mocking yesterday's scene in the break room. The rational part of my brain told me to ignore them, but anxiety twisted my stomach into knots. Around 11 o'clock, my phone vibrated on my desk. An unknown number had sent a text message. "My office. Now. SK." 3 simple words that sent my heart racing into overdrive. Silas Kane. The CEO wanted to see me privately. This couldn't be good. Maybe he regretted getting involved yesterday. Maybe he'd decided I was too much trouble and was going to fire me himself. My hands trembled as I straightened my shirt, which I'd worn specifically because it had long sleeves to hide my wrist, and headed toward the elevator bay. The ride to the top floor felt like ascending to the gallows, each floor number lighting up a step closer to my doom. Silas's assistant, an impeccably dressed woman with sharp eyes and an efficient demeanor, looked up when I approached. "Casper?" she asked, and when I nodded mutely, she gestured toward the imposing double doors behind her. "Go straight in. He's expecting you." No interrogation. No making me wait. She simply waved me through as if this were completely normal. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped into an office that was more luxury penthouse than workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline, morning sunlight streaming through and illuminating the modern furniture and minimalist decor. Behind a massive glass desk that probably cost more than my entire year's salary sat Silas. But he stood immediately when he saw me enter. His expression was completely different from yesterday's controlled fury now. He looked almost gentle concern. "Sit down, Casper." He gestured to one of the comfortable chairs positioned in front of his desk, and I obeyed, perching nervously on the edge like a bird ready to flee. Silas sat as well, leaning forward and folding his hands on the desktop, his posture open and non-threatening. "Yesterday I asked you something important, and you didn't answer me. I understand you were overwhelmed, but I need to know the truth now." I couldn't meet his eyes. My gaze dropped to my lap, where my fingers twisted together anxiously. "I really don't want to cause more problems. It's better if everyone just forgets about it." "Better for whom?" Silas's tone was firm but not harsh. "Casper, look at me. Please." The please got me again. I slowly raised my eyes to meet his, and the genuine concern I saw there made my chest ache. When I see someone hurt, especially someone who works in my company, under my watch it becomes my problem. The situation has already escalated the moment you got injured. Pretending it didn't happen won't protect you. So I'm going to ask one more time. Who hurt you? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, barely above a whisper. Marcus Hale. Saying his name out loud felt like crossing a point of no return. Like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was water or rocks below. I watched Silas's eyes flash with something dark and dangerous, rage. Maybe, or righteous anger, but he controlled it quickly, his expression smoothing back into professional calm. Without breaking eye contact with me, he reached over and pressed a button on his desk phone intercom. "Linda, please have Marcus Hale report to my office immediately. Tell him it's urgent." The next 10 minutes were the longest of my entire life. I sat there in that expensive chair, in that beautiful office, while Silas worked quietly on his computer, his jaw set and his hands occasionally clenching into fists before he'd consciously relax them. He was furious. I could see it simmering beneath his controlled exterior, but he was keeping it together for my sake. When the knock finally came, sharp and confident, my whole body tensed. "Come in," Silas called, his voice carrying authority. Marcus entered with his typical swagger, all expensive cologne and practiced charm, but his confident stride faltered slightly when he spotted me sitting there like an unexpected witness at a trial. "Sir, you needed to see me." His voice was smooth, unbothered, as if he didn't have a care in the world. Silas didn't waste time with pleasantries. He turned his laptop screen around so Marcus could see it clearly. "Watch this." He pressed play. Security footage filled the screen, time stamped from yesterday evening at 6:47 p.m. The angle was perfect, capturing everything. Marcus deliberately walking too close to me in the hallway, his hand shooting out to shove me as I struggled with an armload of files. My body hitting the floor hard, papers exploding everywhere, and then the worst part, Marcus throwing his head back and laughing before walking away without even a backwards glance. The evidence was irrefutable, damning, impossible to explain away. Marcus's face drained of color, going from his usual healthy tan to an ashen gray in seconds. That was just horseplay. We were joking around. His voice had lost all its smoothness, now edged with panic. "Joking?" Silas stood up to his full imposing height, and suddenly the spacious office felt smaller. "Does Casper look like he's laughing in this video? Did you help him up? Apologize? Or did you assault a junior employee and walk away?" He paused, letting the words sink in. "This isn't the first complaint about you, Marcus. Human Resources has documented 3 other incidents involving intimidation and hostile behavior toward people beneath you in the hierarchy. You've been skating by on your sales numbers and connections, but that ends now." Marcus shot me a look filled with pure venom, his eyes promising retribution. "This is ridiculous. He's obviously just seeking attention, trying." "Stop talking." Silas's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "You're suspended, effective immediately. 2 weeks, unpaid. Consider this your only warning. One more complaint, one more instance of you so much as looking at someone the wrong way, and you're terminated." Do I make myself absolutely clear? Marcus opened his mouth as if to argue, seemed to think better of it, and simply turned on his heel and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Silas was there, standing beside my chair, his hand landing gently on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and protection. You should be safer now. I'll make sure of it. But as I looked at the closed door Marcus had just exited through, I knew with absolute certainty that the real trouble was only beginning. Marcus's suspension sent shockwaves through the entire office, and within hours I became the most talked about person in the building for all the wrong reasons. The narrative that spread through whispered conversations and group chats wasn't about workplace harassment or protecting employees. It was about me being a manipulative opportunist who'd played the victim card to gain favor with the CEO. Suddenly, people who'd ignored me for months had plenty to say. I heard fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached, saw eyes roll when I entered meeting rooms, felt the weight of judgment pressing down on me from every direction. The labels started circulating: teacher's pet, attention seeker, and worst of all, gold digger, as if I'd somehow orchestrated getting hurt just to meet Silas. It was absurd and cruel, but corporate politics rarely made sense. Lunch breaks became exercises in isolation. I'd take my sad sandwich, usually peanut butter because groceries were expensive, and retreat to the farthest corner table in the cafeteria, eating quickly while scrolling through my phone to avoid making eye contact with anyone. Most days the table remained empty except for me, a six-seat island of social rejection. I told myself I didn't care, that their opinions meant nothing. But loneliness has a way of seeping into your bones regardless of how tough you pretend to be. I was managing barely until everything changed again on a random Tuesday. I was halfway through my sandwich, mentally reviewing the presentation I needed to finish that afternoon, when someone set their tray down across from me. Not just anyone. Silas Kane. The cafeteria noise level dropped noticeably as conversations stuttered and died. People weren't even pretending not to stare anymore. Phones came out immediately, probably already recording or photographing this unexpected development. My face flushed hot with embarrassment, and I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. "Sir, what are you doing here?" The question came out as an urgent whisper. "Eating lunch," Silas replied casually, unwrapping his sandwich with the same calm demeanor he probably used in boardroom negotiations. "I noticed you always sit alone. Figured you could use some company." He said it so matter-of-factly, as if the CEO regularly dined with lowly interns, as if this wouldn't become the top gossip story by the end of the hour. "People are staring," I hissed, keeping my voice low. "This will make everything worse. Your reputation." "My reputation?" Silas looked up from his food, and there was something unreadable in his dark eyes. "Casper, do you honestly think I care what people whisper about me? I've been in this position long enough to know that people will always find something to gossip about. But what I do care about is that you're being ostracized and isolated because I intervened to protect you. That's not acceptable." His words were kind, but I couldn't shake the anxiety crawling up my spine. "You don't understand. They already think I'm using you to advance my career. This just confirms their suspicions." "Let them think whatever they want," Silas said firmly, then deliberately changed the subject. "What are your weekend plans? Do anything interesting?" The question was so normal, so human, that it caught me off guard. We spent the next 20 minutes talking about mundane things. Favorite movies, books we'd read recently, places we wanted to visit someday. Silas told me he played piano to relax, that he was terrible at cooking but excellent at ordering takeout, that he'd once gotten lost in his own office building during his first week as CEO. He made me laugh, genuinely laugh, for the first time in weeks. The tension in my shoulders eased fractionally, and I almost forgot about the audience watching our every move. But I couldn't ignore them completely. In my peripheral vision I saw phones angled our direction, watched people leaning together to whisper, noticed the speculative looks. This was going to be all over social media within the hour. Dissected and analyzed and turned into evidence of whatever narrative people wanted to believe. When we both stood to clear our trays, Silas did something that made my heart stop. He reached out and gently took hold of my injured wrist, the same one Marcus had bruised. His touch was feather-light, careful not to cause pain. "Is it healing properly?" His voice carried genuine concern. Yes, much better now. Barely hurts anymore. I managed to say, hyper-aware of how many people were probably zooming in on this exact moment with their phone cameras. Good. Then Silas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small tube of medical-grade healing cream, pressing it into my palm and closing my fingers around it. Use this before bed. It'll help with the remaining discoloration and any residual soreness. It was such a small gesture, probably meaningless to him, but my throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Nobody had ever taken care of me like this, with such quiet thoughtfulness, as if my minor injury actually mattered in the grand scheme of things. Thank you, I whispered, meaning it with every fiber of my being. As we walked toward the cafeteria exit together, I heard a group of girls near the beverage station giggling loudly. One of them, Ashley from accounting, who'd always been particularly cold to me, said in a voice clearly meant to carry, "Oh my God, did you see that? Something is definitely happening between them." The way he touched his wrist, so obvious. Her friends dissolved into knowing laughter, the kind that felt like needles under my skin. I tried to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't heard, but the words stung deeper than I wanted to admit. Silas heard too. I saw his jaw clench, the muscle there jumping visibly, but he didn't acknowledge them. Instead, when we reached the elevator bank where our paths would diverge, he turned to face me fully, blocking out everyone else with his presence. "Listen to me, Casper." His voice was low enough that only I could hear. "Those people don't know you. They don't know your work ethic, your talent, or what you're capable of. Their opinions are based on assumptions and jealousy, nothing more. You don't need to prove anything to them. Just keep doing excellent work, and eventually the truth becomes undeniable. Can you do that?" When I nodded, though somewhat uncertainly, he added, "And I'm going to keep having lunch with you whenever my schedule allows, because you're interesting to talk to, and I refuse to let office politics dictate who I spend my time with. Understood?" That evening, after returning to my apartment, I made the mistake of checking my phone. The office gossip group chat, which I'd been added to months ago and never removed from, was exploding with activity. Someone had posted photos of Silas and me in the cafeteria, zoomed in on the moment he'd held my wrist, with captions ranging from "new office romance" to the more vicious "intern sleeping his way to promotion." The comments section was brutal, filled with speculation, judgment, and outright accusations. My hands shook as I scrolled through the vitriol. People I'd worked alongside for months, people who'd seemed nice enough in passing, were now casually destroying my reputation with anonymous cruelty. I opened a new text message to Silas, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for a long moment before I finally typed, "People are talking. Maybe we should maintain distance for a while. This is getting out of hand." I hit send before I could reconsider, then immediately regretted it. What if he agreed? What if he decided I wasn't worth the trouble after all? His reply came through within 60 seconds. "Let them talk until they're hoarse. I'm not going anywhere, Casper. Not now, not ever." I read those words over and over, something warm and terrifying blooming in my chest, because that wasn't just a supportive boss looking out for an employee. That was something else entirely, something personal and intense that I wasn't sure either of us was ready to name. But as I lay in bed that night, phone clutched in my hand, I realized that Silas was serious about protecting me, about whatever this complicated thing between us was becoming. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to stop running from it. The following week brought an unexpected shift in dynamics. With Marcus still serving his suspension and the office gossip reaching a fever pitch, something changed in how Silas approached our professional relationship. He started assigning me actual substantive work, not the menial tasks typically reserved for interns like making copies or organizing filing systems, but real projects that mattered. The biggest assignment came on a Wednesday morning when he called me into his office and asked me to prepare a comprehensive presentation for the upcoming board meeting. My initial reaction was pure panic, because board presentations were typically handled by senior analysts with years of experience, not fresh-faced interns who still felt like imposters in their business casual clothing. "I know this seems daunting," Silas had said, reading the anxiety written all over my face, "but I've reviewed your analytical work over the past months. You have insights that others miss. a perspective that's valuable precisely because you're not entrenched in corporate groupthink. I'll guide you through the process, but the core work needs to be yours. So I threw myself into it with everything I had, determined to prove I deserved this opportunity on merit rather than whatever narrative people were constructing about us. The evenings became long stretches of work, often extending until the office emptied out and only the cleaning crew remained, their vacuum cleaners humming in distant corridors. Silas would stay late too, reviewing my progress, challenging my assumptions, pushing me to think deeper and present more convincingly. These weren't the intimate moments people might imagine when a CEO works closely with someone he cares about. They were rigorous, sometimes frustrating sessions where he refused to let me settle for anything less than excellence. One particular evening around 8 o'clock, when the skyline outside had transformed into a glittering constellation of office lights and the city's evening traffic had finally begun to ease, I was in Silas's office working on the financial projections section. We'd been at it for over 2 hours straight, and I noticed he'd been rubbing his temples periodically, a telltale sign of fatigue. He was leaning back in his executive chair, eyes half closed, and I realized with a start that he probably hadn't eaten anything substantial all day. "You look exhausted," I ventured carefully, knowing he didn't like being fussed over. "We could pick this up tomorrow morning with fresh eyes." He opened his eyes fully and fixed me with that penetrating gaze that always made me feel simultaneously exposed and seen. "No, we need to keep pushing. There are board members already looking for reasons to question your competence, waiting to pounce on any weakness in this presentation as proof of favoritism. You need to walk in there with something so airtight, so thoroughly researched and brilliantly presented that they have no choice but to respect your work." The truth of his words settled heavily in my chest. This wasn't just about doing well, it was about exceeding every possible expectation, about being twice as good to be considered half as worthy. I nodded and returned my focus to the spreadsheet on my laptop, determination overriding my own exhaustion. Several minutes passed in concentrated silence before I heard Silas stand and open one of his desk drawers. He produced a chocolate bar, expensive dark chocolate, the kind that came in elegant wrapping, and placed it on the table beside my laptop. "Eat this. Your brain needs fuel, and working on an empty stomach won't help either of us." I smiled despite myself, unwrapping the chocolate and breaking off a piece. The rich, slightly bitter taste was exactly what I needed. "You're not eating anything either," I pointed out, noticing his own neglected state. "I'm fine," he replied automatically, but his voice carried an edge of weariness that contradicted his words. Without thinking too hard about it, I broke the chocolate bar in half and extended one portion toward him. "Then we share. Fair is fair." Silas looked at me for a long moment, an expression crossing his features that I couldn't quite interpret. Surprise maybe, mixed with something softer, more vulnerable. Then he smiled, and it wasn't the professional smile he used in meetings or the controlled expression he wore around the office. This was genuine, reaching his eyes and transforming his entire face. He took the chocolate. "You really are different from everyone else here, Casper. Most people treat me like I'm a position rather than a person, like I'm a title on a business card instead of someone who gets tired and hungry and needs breaks. That's because you maintain walls that keep people at a professional distance," I said softly, emboldened by the late hour and the intimacy of the empty office. "You're always controlled, always the CEO, never letting anyone see beyond the role. But you're human too. You're allowed to need things." The air between us shifted, becoming charged with something unspoken. Silas set down his chocolate and moved from behind his desk to where I sat, leaning against the edge of the table so we were closer than professional distance typically allowed. His face was now level with mine, close enough that I could see the faint lines of stress around his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw. "Do you know what the real problem is?" His voice had dropped lower, more intimate. "When I'm around you, those walls I've spent years building start crumbling. You make me feel comfortable in a way that's dangerous for someone in my position." My heartbeat accelerated, pulse pounding so loudly I was sure he must hear it. "Dangerous how?" "Because," he paused, and I watched his eyes drop briefly to my lips before returning to hold my gaze. "I think about you constantly. Not as an intern or an employee, but as someone who's become essential to my daily existence. Coming to the office means seeing you. When someone hurts you, I feel rage I've never experienced before. And right now, in this moment, all I want is to kiss you." The confession hung between us, raw and honest and terrifying. My breath caught in my throat, and when I finally found my voice, it emerged as barely a whisper. "Then why don't you?" Even as I said it, I couldn't believe my own boldness, couldn't believe I was encouraging this impossible thing between us. Silas closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering every ounce of self-control he possessed. "Because I'm your superior. Because this complicates everything. Because if I start I won't be able to stop." "Then don't stop," I heard myself say, my voice trembling but certain. The last thread of restraint snapped. Silas closed the remaining distance between us, his lips meeting mine with a softness that surprised me, hesitant at first as if offering me one last chance to pull away. But I didn't pull away. Instead I reached up, my hand finding the collar of his shirt and pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more honest, and for those moments the entire world fell away. The office, the complications, the rules we were breaking, all of it dissolved until there was only this. His hands gentle on my face, my fingers tangled in his hair, the taste of chocolate on his lips mixing with something uniquely him. When we finally separated, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against mine. Eyes still closed. "This is the most reckless thing I've ever done," he whispered. "And somehow also the most right." I smiled, keeping my eyes closed too, just feeling the warmth of him so close. "So what happens now?" "Now." He pulled back slightly to look at me, then pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. "We keep this between us until we figure out how to handle it properly. But I need you to understand something, Casper. I'm not walking away from this. From you. Not now. Not ever. Do you understand?" I nodded, my chest tight with emotions I didn't have names for yet. We both knew this was complicated, that we were crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, that consequences would eventually come knocking. But in that moment, sitting in his office with the city sparkling below us and the taste of his kiss still on my lips, none of the future complications seemed to matter at all. The next 2 weeks existed in a strange duality, like living in two different worlds simultaneously. During office hours, Silas and I maintained strict professionalism, formal emails, appropriate physical distance, interactions that would pass any scrutiny. He was Mr. King in meetings, and I was careful never to presume on his time or attention in ways that would fuel more gossip. But when the office emptied, when the fluorescent lights dimmed and the last employees trickled toward the elevators, we would shed those careful masks. Stolen kisses in his office, long phone conversations late at night when I was home in my apartment and couldn't sleep, secret meetings on the building's rooftop, where no one else ventured and we could exist without pretense. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure, this double life we were leading. For the first time in my existence, I felt genuinely happy, not the hollow contentment of making it through another day, but real joy that made me wake up eager for what came next. But secrets have a way of poisoning the ground they're buried in, slowly contaminating everything around them. On a Friday afternoon, I was leaving the conference room with an armful of files, already planning my weekend, which would hopefully include seeing Silas away from the office for the first time, when I heard voices coming from an empty office whose door had been left slightly ajar. I wouldn't have stopped except I heard my own name spoken with such venom that my feet froze automatically. "Just look at Casper, playing the professional," a female voice said, Ashley from accounting, who I'd once tried to befriend before she made it clear interns weren't worth her time. "Everyone knows he's sleeping with the CEO to climb the ladder. It's pathetic, honestly." Another voice chimed in, this one belonging to someone I didn't immediately recognize. "People like that ruin company culture. They make a mockery of everyone who actually earns their positions through hard work." The words hit like physical blows, even though I'd known people were talking. Hearing it stated so bluntly, with such casual cruelty, made my chest constrict painfully. I wanted to burst in there and defend myself, to shout that I'd never asked for special treatment, that every assignment I completed was done through my own effort and skill. But I forced myself to keep walking, to maintain composure, because confronting them would only escalate the situation and provide more fuel for the rumor mill. Still, those words echoed in my head for the rest of the day, chipping away at my confidence and happiness until I felt hollow. That evening, My phone buzzed with a text from Silas. Rooftop, 9 o'clock. I need to see you. The message carried an urgency that made anxiety spike in my stomach. When I arrived at the rooftop at the designated time, emerging from the stairwell into the cool night air, Silas was already there. The city stretched out below us, a sea of lights and possibilities. But he wasn't looking at the view. As soon as he saw me, he closed the distance and pulled me into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around me like he was afraid I might disappear. I heard what people were saying today. He spoke into my hair, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. What they're calling you. The lies they're spreading about us. Silas, I started. But he continued. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. People are questioning your character, calling you opportunistic and worse. This is happening because of me. Because I couldn't keep my professional boundaries intact. He released me but kept his hands on my shoulders, looking into my eyes with an intensity that was almost painful. Your reputation is being destroyed. Your future career prospects are being damaged. I can't stand by and watch that happen. I reached up and cupped his face in both my hands, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against my palms. What people say doesn't matter to me. I know the truth of who I am and what I've earned. But it matters to me, Silas said firmly, his jaw tight. I care about what this is doing to you, how it's affecting your life. I've been thinking about solutions, and I believe I should temporarily step down from the CEO position. We could bring in an independent investigator to review all your work, verify that your advancement was based purely on merit with no favoritism. Once that's established clearly, absolutely not. I cut him off, my voice cracking with emotion. You're not sacrificing your position because of me. This company is yours. You've built it into what it is. I won't let you throw that away. And you're mine, Silas said, his voice raw and exposed in a way I'd never heard before. If I had to choose between this company and you, Casper, I would choose you every single time without hesitation. Tears pricked at my eyes, threatening to spill over. I don't want you making sacrifices for me. That's not fair to either of us. Silas pressed his forehead to mine, his breath warm against my face. It wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would be prioritizing what actually matters. But I understand if you're not comfortable with that approach. There is another option we could consider. What option? We could go public with our relationship. Officially disclose it to human resources, follow proper protocols, be completely transparent. People will still judge us, probably even more harshly. But at least we'd be handling it with integrity rather than hiding. The suggestion was risky, potentially career-ending for both of us. But Silas was right about one thing. The hiding was becoming unsustainable. The more we concealed our relationship, the more suspicious people became. The darker the speculation grew. Are you absolutely certain about this? I asked, searching his face for any doubt. About you, always. He kissed me then, deep and reassuring. A promise sealed with action, rather than just words. By Monday, we'd submitted formal disclosure to human resources. By Tuesday, a company-wide email went out acknowledging our relationship and outlining the protocols being implemented to prevent conflicts of interest. By Wednesday, the boardroom had become a battlefield. Gerald, a senior board member who'd never liked Silas's more progressive policies, called an emergency meeting where he openly challenged everything from Silas's judgment to my qualifications. This is clear evidence of favoritism, Gerald declared, his voice carrying across the mahogany table. The board needs to take corrective action before this scandal damages the company's reputation further. Silas remained calm, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. Every performance review Casper has received is fully documented. Human Resources has independently verified the legitimacy of his advancements. If you don't trust my professional judgment, Gerald, you're welcome to commission an external audit. I'll cooperate fully. Gerald turned his cold gaze on me, and I felt the weight of his disapproval like a physical force. This young man is your weakness, Silas. Mark my words. He'll bring this entire company down eventually. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, surprising everyone, including myself. My voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I'll prove I deserve my position. Through my work, not through assumptions or prejudice. Judge me on results, not speculation. Silas looked at me with such obvious pride that I had to look away before I lost my composure completely. But as the meeting adjourned and we left separately to maintain appearances, I knew this was only the beginning of a much longer battle. The following month tested every aspect of my resilience and determination. Gerald made it his personal mission to scrutinize my every project with an intensity that bordered on harassment, taking even minor inconsistencies and magnifying them in board presentations as evidence of incompetence. The office divided into camps. A small group who supported us or at least remained neutral, and a larger contingent who viewed our relationship as proof of corruption and favoritism. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove my worth, staying until midnight most evenings, arriving before dawn, triple-checking every analysis and presentation until my eyes burned from screen fatigue. Silas faced his own challenges as board members who'd previously been allies suddenly questioned his every decision, using our relationship as leverage to undermine his authority and push their own agendas. One night when I was working late in my apartment, hunched over my laptop at the small kitchen table that doubled as my desk, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors were rare in my life. When I opened it, Silas stood there looking completely exhausted, dark circles under his eyes and his usually immaculate appearance somewhat disheveled. "I just needed to see you," he said quietly, and something in his voice, a vulnerability I'd never heard before, made me step aside immediately to let him in. We settled on my worn couch, the one I'd bought secondhand when I first moved to the city, and Silas leaned his head against my shoulder with a sigh that seemed to come from deep in his soul. "Sometimes I wonder if I've done you a disservice by pursuing this relationship. Your life has become so much more complicated, so much harder than it needed to be." I ran my fingers gently through his hair, marveling at how someone so powerful could seem so vulnerable in private moments. "My life has meaning now in ways it never did before. Yes, it's difficult, but being with you makes it worthwhile. I'm not going anywhere." He turned to face me, cupping my jaw with one hand, and kissed me slowly, tenderly, as if trying to memorize the moment. "I don't deserve you," he whispered against my lips. "And I don't deserve you either," I replied, meaning it completely. "But we have each other, and that's what counts." We stayed together that night, not in any physical sense beyond holding each other close, finding comfort in simple proximity. Sometimes intimacy isn't about passion. It's about being willing to be completely vulnerable with another person, to let them see you at your weakest and trust they won't use it against you. That night represented something shifting between us, a deepening from attraction and affection into something more permanent and profound. The decisive moment came the following week during the quarterly board meeting. I delivered my presentation, the one Silas and I had worked on for weeks, refined and perfected until it shone with every ounce of skill and confidence I possessed. The data was comprehensive, the analysis was insightful, and the recommendations were backed by thorough research. I anticipated every question, addressed every potential concern, and spoke with the authority of someone who absolutely knew their material. When I finished, the conference room fell silent for several long seconds. Then one board member began clapping and others joined until the room filled with applause. Even Gerald had nothing to criticize, though his expression remained sour. After the meeting formally concluded, Gerald approached me privately while Silas was speaking with other board members. "You're genuinely talented," he said grudgingly, as if the admission physically pained him. "I'll acknowledge that much, but you need to consider whether your relationship with Silas is worth the professional cost he's paying. He's risking everything for you. Is that fair?" I met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. He made his own choice, just as I made mine. I didn't force or manipulate him into anything, and I'm going to continue proving that his faith in my abilities wasn't misplaced. Gerald studied me for a long moment, then nodded with what might have been the beginning of respect. "We'll see how this plays out." The following week brought Vindication. The board held a formal vote on Silas's position and our disclosed relationship. By a comfortable majority, they voted to maintain the current structure, acknowledging that proper protocols had been followed and that my promotion had been legitimately earned based on merit. Human Resources issued an official statement confirming the results of their independent review. We'd won, not completely and not without scars, but we'd survived the worst of it. That evening, Silas invited me to his penthouse for the first time, a space I'd never seen despite months of knowing him. When I arrived, nervous and uncertain what to expect, I found he'd transformed the terrace into something magical. Fairy lights were strung across the space, creating a canopy of soft illumination. Gentle music played from hidden speakers, and the city sprawled below us like a carpet of stars brought to earth. "What is all this?" I asked, genuinely amazed. Silas smiled, the first truly relaxed smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "This is a celebration. We did it, Casper. Together. We proved that integrity and truth can survive corporate politics." We danced slowly to the music, swaying together under the lights with the city as our witness, and it felt like the entire world had narrowed to just this moment, this person, this feeling of completion. Silas held my face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing against my cheekbones, and said words I'd never heard from anyone before. "I love you. I'm in love with you, Casper, in a way I've never experienced with anyone else." Tears spilled down my cheeks. Not from sadness but from overwhelming joy. From the realization that someone saw me completely and chose me anyway. "I love you too, Silas. More than I have words to express." He kissed me then. And that kiss contained promises of future days and nights together, of commitment and partnership, of choosing each other repeatedly despite obstacles. The next morning when we arrived at the office together openly, officially, some people still looked at us with judgment. But more looked with acceptance, and one person had left a note on my desk. "Ashley Hedden, I apologize for my previous comments. You proved all of us wrong. You've earned my respect." I smiled reading it, understanding that this journey hadn't been easy and future challenges would inevitably arise. But with Silas beside me, with love that had survived scrutiny and emerged stronger, I felt ready to face whatever came next. We'd proven that genuine love, honest, committed, resilient love, could withstand judgment and prejudice. Together we'd found home in each other, and that was worth every difficult moment that had brought us here.